Alright folks, here is your actually one and only recorded video of the semester. Your mission, if you choose to accept it, is to get through the next 4 slides, which will have a little video. As I've already alluded to, let's be honest, if you have a lot going on and you just have an interest in space weather, feel free to pick these up sometime after everything else is done. It really is low stress, and I understand there is a lot of stress going on, so don't sweat it too much. So the general idea is that we worked our way through some of the impacts of space weather to either systems surrounding Earth, such as satellites, communication, and now we're working our way briefly down into this idea of what is going on with ground-based systems. And again, these are going to be heavily influenced by what is going on with the currents in the ionosphere. A lot of the charging that goes on here can reach areas near the surface, and these are going to be what we need to deal with when we to be honest, look at some features related to space weather that aren't necessarily what we initially think of. The satellites, for instance, natural thing that is going to be what many of our minds gravitate to. Same with what we talked about with regard to communications. But the ground-based systems, it doesn't necessarily seem that way because we don't really think about space weather making it all the way down to the ground. But these geomagnetic storm events are going to be what actually can reach some of the systems that are ground-based and cause some issues. These variations in the ionosphere can lead to increased or undesirable currents, shall I say, in some of the ground-based conductors, including electric power lines, phone lines, and this can even mean fiber optic cables, which may traverse oceanic regions, pipelines, which may be comprised of a number of different materials. And ultimately, the idea is that these undesired currents can cause disruptions or ultimately failures. We're going to, again, focus on our second case study here in class, the 1989 Quebec power failure, which was pretty notable given the time of year and the temperatures. And again, basically driven by a severe space weather event. Aside from these disruptions and failures, the idea is that we're simply going to have systems that are ground-based that can be affected by space weather have lifespan shortened. The idea that we can have, for instance, some certain metals that are part of our power lines, as we get these undesirable currents, may cause, especially if there is some other features such as rain and other elements going on, we can start to see these corrode early. We can see some cracks in pipelines. Again, we're basically stressing out some of these systems beyond what is desired. And so again, we revisit our chart here with geomagnetic storms. And you can see here most of these categories ranging from G1 up through G5 focus on power systems, spacecraft operations, and then other systems. And so we can kind of see as we look at a number of these features. You can see, for instance, in power systems with down here at G2, we may see some high latitude experience alarms, maybe a little transformer damage with ones that last for a significant amount of time. We can start to see some more, shall we say, events that would cause a human or other system to have to interrupt or basically interfere with what would otherwise cause significant damage here, causing some voltage corrections. When we get to G4, that's when we actually start to see the notable issues to ground-based systems. And again, we're looking at not a completely rare occurrence, but something that's far from common. Here we're showing about 100 times per cycle, a cycle, of course, lasting approximately 11 years. So here we got widespread voltage control problems. We may have circuits trip, and that obviously is going to cause some power outages. And then finally the G5, the stuff that we really do get concerned about. Here you can see widespread voltage control problems. We may get some grid systems that are basically blacking out for an extended period of time. And so we're really going to be concerned with the G4 and G5 events in particular when we start to talk about ground-based systems. And so again, these power grids can be disrupted or even decimated by the intense geomagnetic storms. We know over the course of the semester this is going to have, there's going to be a strong influence of where are these events that are occurring on the sun, how are they directed towards Earth, and some of the preceding conditions. This is something, for instance, with the Carrington event where we saw a series of storms, each one effectively weakening Earth's protection and causing the strong latter storm to have a greater influence than it would have had if it were simply occurring in a vacuum. And so what's going on in this is that we have differences in the magnetic field. Basically the idea that if we take a magnetic field and I'm trying to think of a better term than vary it in time, but it's the end of the semester for me as well. The idea that we're simply having a oscillating or a vacillating magnetic field, and if this occurs for a period of time, it can induce an electrical current, and this may be an electrical current that is completely undesirable. And it institutes just a number of different things that may lead to things basically corroding over time. And so here you can see in the string of events, we get this increased amount of electrical activity up in the ionosphere. We know that as the geomagnetic storm intensity increases, these events work their way closer and closer to equatorial regions. And so as we see these currents evolving, this can create this magnetic field which is evolving in time as well. And that can basically induce a completely undesirable voltage in some of our conductors. So in other words, if we induce a voltage that is not a voltage that a system is designed to handle, it can basically short things out. It can cause systems to fry, to melt. You may have at some point in your life experienced a transformer, one of the big things at the top of a power pole, where it simply explodes. They're designed not to cause significant damage other than sparking and basically a large power outage, but this can cause those types of things to occur. And one of the other factors is what is the current load on an overall system. The idea that if you cause an increased current or induce a voltage when there's not a whole heck of a lot going on, the issues may be relatively minor. But as we'll see in one of the upcoming videos, when you're impacting a system that is already taxed, maybe due to the cold temperatures, so on and so forth, this can cause some pretty significant impacts. And so, yes, this is the type of stuff that we maybe should be a little more scared about than we are. The fact that if you get some significant setups, again, maybe thinking of the event in 2012 that missed Earth that we've brought up a few times, the fact that this is not necessarily instantaneous recovery. Folks from NIPSCO or REMC come out and basically put the wire back online and you're good to go. These can be long-term outages. I'm not saying that you should take what you learn in space weather and go start doomsday planning, but at the same point, it is one of those things that given we really haven't seen a significant event in areas such as the United States, that maybe our time is coming. And so we got a couple of videos. Some of these will take a little bit of time.
Our sun provides us with the light and heat we need to keep warm and grow the crops we need to survive. It makes possible the very existence of life on this planet. It is the ultimate battery that drives our climate and our energy needs. And, like an electric current, its overload can plunge us into darkness. On Friday, March 10th, a powerful explosion on the sun launched a cloud of gas from active region 5395, a sunspot group nearly dead center on the sun and over 3 Earths in diameter. The storm cloud rushed out from the sun at 1,000,000 miles an hour, and on the evening of Monday, March the 12th, it struck Earth's magnetic field. Millions of people in Alaska, Canada, and Scandinavia were treated to a spectacular auroral display that night that lasted from sunset until midnight. A spectacular light show took the skies as far south as Florida and Cuba. A vast majority of people in the northern hemisphere had never seen such a spectacle in recent times. Some even worried that a nuclear first strike might be in progress. Silently, the storm had impacted the magnetic field of the Earth and caused continent-wide electrical currents to flow in the ground. The expanding ring of storm currents created by the northern lights swooped downwards in latitude deep into North America. This caused continent-wide electrical currents to flow in the ground beneath the Gawker's feet. The currents eventually found harbor in the electrical systems of the United Kingdom, the United States, and Canada. At 2:44:16 a.m. on March 13th, all was well as power engineers operated the Hydro-Quebec power grid. They had resigned themselves to yet another night of watching power loads come and go during the off-peak hours. The engineers didn't know, however, that for the last half hour, their entire system had been under attack by powerful earth currents. A power grid consists of hundreds of electrical generation plants, thousands of transformers that boost the voltages to send the current along transmission lines, tens of thousands of substations that step down the voltages, and millions of power poles that serve to connect the substations to the customers. This entire network must be maintained or regulated to a fixed voltage so that the power is moved efficiently. The large transformers are grounded to the earth, and this provides a pathway for magnetic storm earth currents to enter the network. If the storm is strong enough, the network loses its regulation, and this can cause damage to costly transformers that take weeks to repair or even years to replace. Since magnetic storms cover millions of square kilometers, entire power grids can be shut down, causing major blackouts. At 2:44:17 a.m., these currents found a weak spot in a sprawling North American power grid located in Quebec. A 100-ton static bar capacitor, number 12, at the Chibougamau substation, tripped and went offline as harmonic currents caused protective relays to sense overload conditions. At 2:44:19 a.m., 2 seconds later, the loss of voltage regulation at Chibougamau caused power swings and a reduction of power generation in the 735,000-volt La Grande transmission network. At 2:44:46 a.m. and 150 kilometers away at the Albanel and the Miscou stations, 4 more capacitors went offline. The last station to fall at 2:45:16 a.m. was the La Vérendrye complex to the south of Chibougamau. The fate of the network had been sealed in barely 59 seconds as the entire 9,460 megawatt output from Hydro-Quebec's La Grande hydroelectric complex found itself without proper regulation. Lasting 75 seconds from start to finish, the cascading events traveled much too fast in space and time for human operators to react. But it was more than enough time for 21 billion watts of badly needed electrical power to suddenly disappear from service. The nighttime temperature in Toronto was 19 degrees Fahrenheit, or -7 degrees Celsius, so the loss of electric power was felt very dramatically as most people woke up to cold homes for breakfast. Over 3 million people live near Montreal, the second largest metropolitan area in Canada, where nearly half the population of Quebec resides. Montreal is famous for its 30 kilometers of underground walkways linking 60 buildings, 2 universities, and thousands of shops and businesses. Over 500,000 people use this system each day to avoid the freezing cold winter air. Pedestrians suddenly found themselves plunged into complete darkness with only the feeble battery-powered safety lights to guide them to the surface. The presses at the Montreal Gazette had been rolling at breakneck speed that night.
Alright, we're going to try to keep going with this. We had a little glitch, and we're going to try to resume the video now.
Shower. And paralyzed Dorval Airport, delaying dozens of flights. Without their navigation radar in operation, no flight could land or take off until power had been restored. People ate their cold breakfasts in the dark and left for work. They soon found themselves stuck in congested traffic. Motorists tried to navigate darkened intersections without any streetlights or traffic control systems operating. Thanks to working emergency generators, no major problems were reported for most of Montreal's hospitals, although the Montreal Children's Hospital canceled all elective surgery. A more urgent situation did arise at the Saint-Luc Hospital when 4 patients in intensive care had to have air pumped into their lungs manually. Like most modern cities, people work round the clock, and in the early morning hours of March 13, the swing shift staffed many office buildings in the caverns of downtown Montreal. All these buildings were now pitch dark, stranding workers in dark offices, stairwells, and elevators. The Quebec blackout cost businesses tens of millions of dollars as it stalled production, idled workers, and spoiled products. By 10 a.m., power had been restored to most of the customers in Quebec. And by 11 a.m. on March 14, all but 3,500 of the 842,000 customers were back in business. Almost immediately, in the daily papers on March 14th, the cause was attributed by scientists and engineers to a magnetic storm, and the cause of the blackout switched to an act of God event for which Hydro-Quebec could not be held entirely responsible. I recently spoke with electric power engineer John Deland at Hydro-Quebec about the 1989 blackout.
In the following weeks after the 1989 event, corrective action has been the decision to use space weather forecasting services. This service will alert the operator that something is coming or might be coming with a given probability, a given severity, and then the operator can be prepared to take corrective action against the geomagnetic storm.
The National Research Council in Ottawa issued a warning to the utility about the impending magnetic storm 6 days before the event arrived. To its credit, Hydro-Quebec heeded these warnings and recommendations and reduced the power by 10% as a precaution. Yet pointing a finger at the sun was not considered a credible explanation by a population unfamiliar with the effects that solar storms are capable of. Although this historic blackout was largely a local political and economic event for Quebec, it served as a major wake-up call for the United States.
Alright, so that was a little video again over showing what happened with the Canadian blackout. Again, a little bit of detail that maybe goes beyond what we need to discuss in terms of the systems themselves, but still kind of interesting. We're going to show another video. Again, I'm at some computer memory issues, so hopefully it doesn't fault again. We'll make this one pretty quick, and then we will finish off the last slide. Command decision, because you expect the utmost in professionalism in space weather. For the sake of the memory issues, I will post a link to this USGS. This one is a little less of a case study and just again talking about some of the hazards from geomagnetic storms. For the sake of time and memory issues, I know it was tease. I apologize. Anyways, last slide. Again, corrosion. It's one of those issues that we just talked about, so I'm going to make this relatively quick. The idea that it is like if you have moisture on a piece of metal and you set it outside, it's going to rust, and that rust weakens things over time. And so space weather, if we are in a region, especially areas that are susceptible to relatively high levels of geomagnetic activity, start thinking about, again, a number of our systems, especially oil and gas, that are going to be at some of our higher latitudes, areas near the aurora ovals. These are going to have special types of systems to ground them properly in order to be able to discharge these undesirable currents, this additional amperage that ends up getting into the systems. And over time, we've learned a little bit about where these are affected and how they're affected, so we do a better job. But just like a lot of our infrastructure, many of these were built years ago, and we do end up having some issues. We can even simply get leaks, and obviously leaks of things such as oil and natural gas are far from desirable. And these can be influenced very heavily by space weather, aside from some other features such as, again, moisture getting into pipes, so on and so forth. So that generally is the end of your space weather lecture. I will post these as well as that video to YouTube, and you can watch them again at your leisure. If you have made it this far, A, congratulations, and B, thank you again for taking the class, and I look forward to getting some feedback from you, whether it be in the course of ALS or later on after the semester is over in person, to say what you liked and what you might like to change.
Again, take care, stay healthy.